All right, so now we're going to continue to extend our knowledge of adding input into the game, and we're going to do so by looking specifically at the keyboard class. So, as I said, we're going to focus on the keyboard today, and what you're going to notice is that the keyboard is actually fairly similar to the gamepad. It has its own keyboard state class, it has its own keyboard.getState method that we'll use. It's just slightly different, the code is a little bit different, and we use a different method when we're trying to actually determine whether a key is pressed or released. So just like the gamepad class, there is something called the keyboard class, and this, just like the gamepad class, forms the connection between the program and the keyboard. And what it essentially does is it reads the keyboard. So we're able to read in the input of all of the keys on the keyboard, from the space bar to the letters to the numbers on the number pad. We can read in all of them, and then our game can respond appropriately. And just like the gamepad class, our keyboard class has something called the GetState method. Now, what you'll notice is that it takes in no parameters. So when we had the gamepad, we had to actually put in the player index that we wanted. Because keyboards are typically only one keyboard plugged into a computer at a time, you don't have to specify which keyboard you're using. You can just say access the keyboard and look at the button. So you just do GetState and then empty parentheses, because you will not have any parameters that you need to send inside. So essentially what this method will do is that it will read the settings of the keyboard, and then it will send those settings back to the game. And then just like before, we need to save this value inside of an object, and we'll talk about that object on the next slide. So just like reading in the gamepad, we need to read in the keyboard. So you'll notice that I have a keyboard state object, and that object is used to save the settings of the keyboard. You'll notice I named mine key B. This can be named anything. I just chose KB because that makes it a little bit easier. And then you can see we're looking at getting the state of that keyboard by using the keyboard class called GetState. So you go to the keyboard class, which is right here. You go to the GetState method, and that will get all of the settings of the different buttons on the keyboard, and it will send it back into our keyboard state object. So I'm going to make that line a little bit better. Essentially what it will do is it will send it back to here. So again, one more time, what's happening is you're creating a keyboard state object called whatever you want. Mine is called KB. And you are setting that equal to the settings of the keyboard, and you're accessing the settings of the keyboard by going into the keyboard class and using the GetState method. Alright, so if you look on the screen now, what you'll see is an example of what this line of code looks like when put into MonoGame. Remember, you can name this object here whatever you want, but you'll see that I'm saving the settings of the keyboard into that keyboard state object. And notice again that this is in the update section, so it is constantly updating and changing. As the user changes their input throughout gameplay. Alright, so actually using this data is a little bit different than in the gamepad class. In the gamepad class, we just access the button state.pressed or button state.released. In the keyboard class, we have to utilize a method called IsKeyDown. This is actually a method that will check if a particular key is pressed or is not. So essentially what happens is saying IsKeyDown will go in, it will look and see is the key down, and it will return the value true or false. So this doesn't have a state called key pressed and key released, but instead has a method that will check is the key down and then returns the value true or false. So there are two options that you can use when you add this into code. First, you'll see this is now in my program, so you can see how this is different than the gamepad input up above. We had pad1.buttons.a, and we're checking to see if that is equal to button state.pressed. But the keypad, which is right here, is a little bit different. So I use my keyboard state object, whether you call it keys or KB or whatever you call it, dot is key down. So it's accessing this method. And then this part right here, you'll notice that this is in a different color, .r. This is accessing the R key on the keyboard. So you'll do KB or keys, whatever the name of your keyboard state object is, dot is key down, and then you're going to look at keys.r. You're going to look specifically at the R key, and what this method will do is it will check and it will return the value true or false. So you'll notice here we have a different type of conditional. What we're looking at is whether or not this method returns the value true. So is it returning true or false? And if it returns true, that the key is down, it will run this code. And if it returns the value false, it will jump to the end of that conditional and not run the code inside. So you see it's a little bit different. We use a method here where up above we actually access the properties of the gamepad state object. Now, for some of my more experienced programmers, they will actually just use this right here where it says keys.IsKeyDown keys.r. So because this method returns true or false, and we're checking to see when it's equal to true, we can just put that method in there because it will return a true or false value, which can then be used inside of a conditional. So we don't necessarily need that equals true part, but you can include it if you like. So if you like to have keys.IsKeyDown keys.r, and then check if that returns something that is true, so check equals true, that's fine. Or you can just have the object accessing the method in there because that method will return a true or false value. So either strategy works because you're getting a value that is true or false inside of that Boolean statement, inside of that conditional. So you'll see it will result in a Boolean value, and that can run in a conditional. So you can use either strategy. It doesn't matter to me. I'll just look for whatever you choose to use in your own code. So at this point, you are now done with the keyboard video. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into the next video on my classroom website, and that will actually have you go into Monogame and add keyboard input for the first time.